Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through the quiet corridors of the past. You are here with me, the sleepy historian, and together we will wander through a story told slowly, carefully, and softly, designed for one purpose above all, to help you drift into peaceful rest. This is boring history for sleep. A place where ancient civilizations unfold at a pace calm enough to ease the mind, where bedtime, relaxation, and soft storytelling are woven together like the threads of a faded tapestry. Tonight's story will carry us far away, across seas and centuries, to the heart of Southeast Asia, where the Khmer Empire once rose in splendor. Imagine yourself under a sky heavy with stars, listening to the faint echo of temple bells across a jungle landscape. These echoes are faint now, almost whispers, but once they marked the rhythm of life in one of the most extraordinary civilizations the world has ever known. If this kind of storytelling helps you find rest, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if it truly brings you peace. I find it strangely comforting to know who else is out there, listening in the dark. So let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Perhaps it is midnight, perhaps it is dawn, but all across the world there are people falling asleep to the same old stories. So dim the lights. Let the past settle around you like a blanket. Let the ruins speak, and let the myths unfold. Tonight's theme is unbelievable truth about the cultural glory of the Khmer Empire. We will move slowly through 4 parts. First, a soft immersion into daily life among the Khmer people. Then the biography of a ruler who shaped their destiny, followed by the mysteries of their temples and art. And finally, a contrast between the lives of ordinary villagers and the elite who walked in palace gardens. The pace will be unhurried, like footsteps along ancient stone causeways. The words will linger, repeating here and there in gentle patterns, so that if your mind drifts away into sleep, you will not miss anything urgent. History, after all, is patient. The Khmer Empire rose and fell over centuries, and tonight we will honor that slowness. This is calm bedtime storytelling, soft-spoken history documentary, relaxing history to fall asleep to. A history sleep story for fans of Roman ruins, Egyptian tombs, Khmer temples, archaeology, or simply the quiet murmur of narration. For tonight, we step into Cambodia's past. You may find yourself imagining the scent of damp earth after monsoon rains, the rustle of palm fronds swaying in the breeze, or the rhythm of wooden pestles grinding rice in village courtyards. These details, small and unhurried, will accompany you as you slip gently towards sleep. Now let us begin the long, soft journey. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a Khmer village nearly 1,000 years ago, during the height of the empire's prosperity. The air is thick with warmth, the kind of heavy heat that carries the scent of damp earth after the rains. Around you, wooden houses rise on stilts, their roofs thatched with palm leaves, perched above the ground to protect against floods and crawling creatures. Chickens scurry beneath the houses, scratching in the dirt, while children laugh faintly in the distance, their voices carried on the humid air like small, bright bells. This was the daily world of the Khmer people, not the grandeur of Angkor's temples, not the intricate carvings that survive in stone, but the simple rhythm of fields, markets, and family courtyards. The empire is remembered for its cultural glory, its monumental architecture, its sophisticated irrigation, but all of it rested upon the lives of countless farmers who tended rice fields season after season. The rhythm of their lives was dictated by the monsoon, that great turning wheel of water and sky. When the rains came, the paddies filled, gleaming like sheets of polished bronze beneath the sun. When the dry season returned, the land hardened, and the people worked with patience, coaxing crops from the stubborn soil. Imagine the fields in the early morning. Women in simple cotton cloths tied about their waists, moving steadily through the mud, planting seedlings in careful rows, their hands moving with practiced repetition. Men balance across dikes with wooden plows, guiding slow oxen through waterlogged fields. The smell of wet soil, the feel of water lapping against skin, the quiet hum of insects all blend into the atmosphere of a single morning. Rice was more than food. It was the foundation of existence, a currency of survival, and even a form of tribute to kings and temples. Entire families worked together, their lives revolving around the cycles of planting and harvest. And when the grain was cut and dried, it would be stored in granaries raised above the ground, their slatted walls allowing air to pass through, keeping the rice safe until the next season. In the village, mornings also brought the low, rhythmic beat of pestles pounding rice in wooden mortars. That sound, steady and soft, was part of the heartbeat of Khmer life. Imagine listening from the shade of a house, watching the steady lifting and falling of pestles as women prepared the daily meals. Nearby, fish caught from rivers and reservoirs were cleaned and dried in the sun, while herbs and spices hung in bundles from rafters. Children played in the dirt paths between homes, sometimes splashing in ponds or chasing each other beneath fruit trees. Elderly men and women, their skin lined from decades beneath the tropical sun, sat together weaving baskets or repairing nets. Each person contributed to the household's survival, and though their names have long vanished from records, their labor sustained the very empire whose ruins still draw wonder today. And beyond the village, life was tied to water in another way. The Khmer engineered one of the most remarkable hydraulic systems of the medieval world. Vast reservoirs, or barrages, stretching for miles, catching and distributing water across the countryside. To the villager, these monumental lakes were simply part of life, sources of fish, places where lotus flowers opened each morning. The system of canals and reservoirs meant that rice harvests could be abundant, feeding not only the village but also armies, temple workers, and royal households. As the day moved toward afternoon, the heat grew thicker, pressing down like a weight. Farmers rested in the shade, chewing betel nut, their teeth stained red, while children napped in hammocks tied beneath the stilts of houses. Life was measured, not rushed. Tasks were performed in a rhythm set by nature rather than by clocks or schedules. The steady, patient repetition of daily life was its own kind of ritual. At sunset, the village shifted again. Fires were lit, their smoke rising lazily into the darkening sky. Meals were shared: rice, fish stew, perhaps fruits or vegetables from small gardens. The night carried its own sounds: the chorus of frogs, the buzz of cicadas, the occasional bark of dogs. Families gathered close, their homes illuminated only by small oil lamps. Stories were told, sometimes of ancestors, sometimes of spirits, sometimes of kings whose temples glowed faintly on the horizon. For villagers, the empire's grandeur was both distant and immediate. Distant because the palace and its rulers were far away. Immediate because their labor and their tribute sustained that grandeur. And so the rhythm of their lives continued, day after day, season after season. A quiet persistence, a constant struggle balanced with a constant faith that the rains would return, that the rice would grow, and that their families would endure. When you think of the Khmer Empire, you might picture Angkor what rising in golden light, but beneath those towers lived people whose days were filled with mud, rice, laughter, and smoke from cooking fires. Their world was quieter, softer, slower, but without it, there would have been no empire at all. If you look a little closer at daily Khmer life, beyond the rice fields and courtyards, you begin to notice the threads of belief that ran through every action. The people of the Khmer Empire did not see their days as ordinary in the way we might. To them, life was always connected to unseen forces, spirits in the forests, ancestors in the household shrines, and gods whose temples rose above the treetops. Religion was not separate from life. It was woven into it, quiet and constant. Inside each stilted home, there might be a small corner dedicated to offerings, a dish of rice, a flower, a stick of incense. These gestures were simple, but they carried weight. They reminded the family that they were never alone, that ancestors watched, that unseen powers guided the rains, the harvest, and even the fates of kings. Imagine the faint fragrance of incense mingling with the smell of cooking rice, drifting upward through the rafters into the humid night. Buddhism and Hinduism both shaped Khmer culture, blending and overlapping across generations. A villager might visit a Buddhist monk in the morning and then leave an offering to a Hindu deity in the evening. The two traditions were not in conflict for most people. They were complementary, both offering protection and meaning. In the village, monks often taught children how to read and recite sacred texts, their voices soft and rhythmic. Monasteries served as places of refuge, learning, and quiet contemplation. Imagine yourself sitting beneath a banyan tree as orange-robed monks pass by, their bowls carried close to their chests. Villagers would place food into the bowls, rice, fruit, or a bit of fish, gestures of merit-making believed to bring good fortune in this life and the next. It was part of the rhythm of daily existence, to give, to honor, to remember. And yet, life was not purely spiritual. Practical skills filled the days. Craftsmen worked with wood, clay, and metal. Potters shaped vessels with slow, steady hands, turning clay into jars for storing rice wine or water. Carpenters cut and shaped wood into boats that glided along the rivers and canals. Blacksmiths hammered iron into tools and weapons, their forges glowing like miniature suns within the dark green jungle. The rivers themselves were highways of the empire. Boats of every size moved along them. Narrow dugouts paddled by fishermen, broad trading vessels carrying rice, spices, or cloth. The gentle splash of oars was a common sound. Imagine gliding down one of these waterways, the banks lined with palm trees and fruit orchards, dragonflies skimming the surface, water buffalo standing knee-deep in the shallows. These rivers connected villages to markets, markets to towns, and towns to the capital of Angkor. Markets were lively places, though not hurried or overwhelming. Farmers brought baskets of rice, vegetables, and fruits. Fishermen arrived with their catches, still glistening in the morning light. Traders offered cloth, beads, pottery, and sometimes imported goods from far-off lands. Perhaps a jar of Chinese porcelain or spices from India. The air would be filled with soft voices, the bartering not shouted, but murmured, as buyers and sellers weighed rice in simple balances or compared the quality of woven cloth. Life was also marked by the cycle of festivals. Each season carried its own moments of celebration, times when the village would come together, music would play, and the seriousness of daily labor gave way to joy. Drums and gongs resounded. Dancers moved with slow grace, their hands bending in gestures as fluid as water. Torches lit the night, reflecting off lacquered masks and silken garments. These occasions offered not only delight, but also a reminder of the empire's spiritual ties. Festivals often honored gods or marked the turning of the seasons, binding community life to the cosmos. The contrast between festival and field work was striking, but natural. The same people who bent their backs to plant rice were also dancers, musicians, storytellers. In the evenings, after long work days, families sometimes gathered to hear tales. Epics from India, such as the Ramayana, reimagined in Khmer tradition, or local legends of Naga serpents and forest spirits. The stories were not hurried. They unfolded slowly, verse by verse, gesture by gesture, so that even if the listener drifted into sleep, the tale would still continue like a river flowing in the background. And so, within the daily life of the Khmer people, you find both the ordinary and the extraordinary, muddy rice fields and glowing temples, incense smoke and fish stew, laughter of children and chanting of monks. All of it coexisted in a rhythm that felt unbroken, as though time itself moved in wide, gentle circles rather than straight lines. Their days may have been filled with labor, but they were also filled with meaning, binding the smallest actions to the vastness of the divine. If you imagine lying down in such a village at night, beneath a roof of palm leaves, with the air alive with the chorus of insects, you might sense that blend of work and worship, of earth and heaven. It was the backdrop of an empire that rose higher and more splendid than most could have imagined, yet was grounded in lives so quiet, so steady, they are easy to overlook. But without these lives, these countless small gestures of planting, praying, building, and storytelling, the Khmer Empire would never have reached its heights. As evening deepened in a Khmer village, life did not simply stop. The rhythm continued, only softer, slower, cloaked in the warmth of firelight. Imagine sitting beneath the stilts of a house, the faint glow of an oil lamp flickering above, while shadows stretch across the packed earth floor. The day's heat lingers, yet the air is cooler now, carrying the smell of wood smoke and stewing fish. In the distance, you hear the croaking of frogs and the occasional murmur of voices from neighboring homes. It is a time of rest, but also of connection. Meals at night were shared communally. A family gathered around low trays, scooping rice with their hands or with simple spoons, dipping it into bowls of broth flavored with herbs and tamarind. Fish, caught earlier in the day, might be roasted over open flames or preserved with salt for the days ahead. Fruits like bananas, mangoes, or papayas often sweetened the end of a meal. Eating was not hurried. It was part of the rhythm of living together, part of the unspoken ritual that bound households. After meals, the world slowed even further. Children might curl in hammocks, lulled by the rocking motion and the soft voices of parents or grandparents. Stories often fill the air at this hour. Myths of ancient heroes, tales of serpent kings, or lessons drawn from Buddhist parables. These were not delivered with urgency, but in a measured, melodic tone, almost like chanting, designed as much to comfort as to teach. Imagine drifting to sleep with such a voice carrying you into dreams, the past and the present blending gently. For the villagers, the night sky was not empty. It was alive with meaning. The constellations above were reminders of divine order, of cycles that governed both the heavens and the earth. Farmers looked to the stars to anticipate seasons. Sailors used them to guide boats along rivers and coastlines. The Milky Way itself, spreading across the dark sky, might be seen as a celestial river, echoing the watercourses below that sustained Khmer life. The empire's great temples mirrored these skies. The most famous, Angkor Wat, was aligned to the movements of the sun, capturing equinoxes and solstices with remarkable precision. For villagers, even if they rarely visited the temple itself, the knowledge that the god's order was built into its stones must have been a source of reassurance. Their daily toil in the fields was not separate from the cosmos. It was part of it, reflected in both earth and sky. Within the village, social life also carried quiet structures. Families were central, but so too were networks of kin and neighbors. When a house was raised, when rice was planted, or when floods threatened, the community worked together. This sense of collective duty gave life its resilience. Imagine neighbors passing baskets of rice seedlings hand to hand or gathering to mend a roof after storms. These small acts of cooperation were as vital as the great canals and temples often celebrated in history books. The role of women was particularly significant in Khmer households. They managed not only the preparation of food, but also the organization of trade and the preservation of cultural traditions. In markets, women were often the ones weighing goods, negotiating quietly, and keeping the accounts of their families. They also played key roles in maintaining rituals, tending to shrines, preparing offerings, and teaching children the prayers and stories that shaped their understanding of the world. Children's lives, though filled with work, also carried moments of play. Games with pebbles, chasing birds, or splashing in ponds all formed part of their days. Laughter echoed through the villages, blending with the more solemn sounds of drums or chants drifting from nearby monasteries. This mixture of joy and duty, of innocence and responsibility, was part of the texture of life. As night deepened, silence eventually settled. The lamps burned low, the fires turned to embers. Villagers lay on mats of woven reeds, often beneath mosquito nets of simple cloth. The hum of insects grew steady, almost hypnotic. Sleep came gradually, not rushed, as the world outside continued its quiet chorus. The rhythms of the day gave way to the rhythms of the night, each blending into the other, a circle that repeated endlessly. It is easy, when thinking of the Khmer Empire, to focus only on its kings, its monuments, its military campaigns. But beneath all of that grandeur lay these lives. Villagers whose days began in rice paddies and ended in flickering firelight, who lived surrounded by water, forest, and sky. Their labor, their rituals, their cooperation built the foundation on which palaces stood and temples rose. Their daily lives, though simple, contained a quiet resilience, a steady dignity that allowed the empire to flourish for centuries. When you imagine them, you can almost hear the faint echoes, the splash of paddles on water, the creak of wooden houses, the chanting of monks, the laughter of children, the soft pounding of rice. These sounds have long since faded into silence, but in remembering them, we allow their world to stir once more, softly, gently, like the whisper of a breeze through palm leaves. And so the rhythm of Khmer daily life becomes, even now, a kind of lullaby. When we shift from the quiet rhythms of the Khmer villages to the figure of a king, the pace of history changes, but our telling remains gentle, slow, and unhurried. Imagine the capital of Angkor in the 12th century, its wide avenues shaded by tall trees, its reservoirs glistening beneath the sun. In this world, a ruler emerged whose name still echoes across Southeast Asia, Jayavarman VII, remembered as one of the most remarkable monarchs of the Khmer Empire. Jayavarman's life is known only in fragments, pieced together from inscriptions and temple carvings, but the fragments are enough to form a picture of a determined, deeply religious and ambitious leader. He rose to power during a time of upheaval. Before his reign, the empire had suffered military defeats at the hands of the rival kingdom of Kampa. The capital itself had been attacked, temples looted, and the empire's confidence shaken. Out of this turmoil, Jayavarman came to the throne. Imagine the atmosphere of Angkor at that moment. An empire bruised, its people weary, its monuments scarred by conflict. Into this uncertainty, a new king stepped forward, not only to reclaim lost territories, but to reshape the very image of Khmer kingship. Unlike many rulers before him who emphasized conquest or wealth, Jayavarman VII styled himself as a compassionate ruler, a servant of his people, and above all, a protector of Buddhism. Though his reign involved military campaigns to secure borders and restore stability, he is remembered more for his cultural and religious vision. He championed Mahayana Buddhism, shifting the empire's spiritual center away from Hindu deities and toward the figure of the Bodhisattva, especially Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassion. In doing so, he created an empire whose monuments reflected not only power, but also mercy. Perhaps his most enduring legacy lies in the building projects he commissioned. Imagine the landscape of Angkor transformed under his orders. Temples rising in stone, roads stretching across jungles, reservoirs repaired and expanded, and hospitals established throughout the kingdom. Among his creations, the Bayon Temple stands out, its towers adorned with massive stone faces, serene, smiling, gazing in all four directions. Scholars debate whether those faces represent Avalokiteshvara or Jayavarman himself merged with the divine, but to those who walked beneath them centuries ago, they must have seemed like guardians watching over the empire with infinite calm. He also ordered the construction of Ta Prohm, a temple dedicated to his mother, and Priya Khan, dedicated to his father. These acts were not only gestures of filial devotion, but also a way to link his family to divine and cosmic order. To walk through Ta Prohm then would have been to enter a space where stone met forest, where roots and towers intertwined, long before the jungle reclaimed it in later centuries. But perhaps most striking of Jayavarman's projects were the networks of hospitals, more than 100 across the empire, designed to provide care for the sick and the weary. In a time when rulers often concerned themselves only with palaces and temples, this focus on public welfare was extraordinary. Imagine weary travelers on jungle roads, stopping at a rest house built under the king's command, finding shelter, food, and medicine. To the people of the empire, such acts must have seemed like proof that their king truly embodied compassion. And yet, beneath this gentle image, we should not forget the realities of power. Building temples on such a scale required enormous resources: labor, stone, wood, and food to sustain the workers. Thousands of villagers would have been called upon to contribute their labor, carving stone, hauling blocks, or preparing supplies. For them, the king's compassion may have been mixed with exhaustion, the glory of temples balanced against the strain of service. Still, the monuments they left behind endure, their stones whispering of both ambition and sacrifice. The image of Jayavarman VII is often remembered through his statues, portraits that show him not in regal splendor, but in meditation, eyes half closed, lips curved in a faint smile, seated in quiet dignity. Unlike the fierce or triumphant images of other rulers, these statues convey calm, introspection, even vulnerability. Imagine standing before one of these statues in a temple hall, the air cool, the light dim, incense drifting upward. The king's face gazes not at you, but inward, as if inviting contemplation. Jayavarman's reign was long, and during it, the Khmer Empire reached a new cultural height. His roads stretched farther, his monuments shone brighter, his cities bustled with life. But his achievements were not only material, they were spiritual. He gave the empire a new identity, one that blended politics with compassion, strength with humility. As night fell in Angkor, perhaps the villagers and temple workers who had labored all day looked toward the glowing towers of Bayon or Ta Prohm, and in their flickering outlines saw both the majesty of their king and the promise of protection. Jayavarman Bai's life reminds us that history is not only about conquest, but also about vision, about the attempt to build a world where stone and spirit, ruler and people, could exist in harmony, even if only for a time. To understand the legacy of Jayavarman VII, it helps to picture not only the monuments he built, but also the events that shaped his reign. His story is inseparable from the wars with the Kampa Kingdom, a maritime power along the coast of present-day Vietnam. These conflicts left deep marks on the Khmer Empire, and they provided the backdrop against which Jayavarman rose. The Khams were skilled sailors, their fleets navigating the South China Sea and its connected rivers. In the late 12th century, they launched daring raids against the Khmer heartland. One of their most devastating strikes came in 1177, when they sailed up the Mekong River, turned into the Tunnel Sap, and attacked Angkor itself. Imagine the shock of the Khmer capital, its temples and houses suddenly overwhelmed by enemies arriving on ships. Inscriptions suggest that the city was plundered, its pride shaken, its people left in despair. It was in the wake of this catastrophe that Jayavarman VII emerged. At first, he was not king, but a prince of royal blood, perhaps living in relative obscurity. The chronicles are not clear on every detail, but he rallied forces and launched counterattacks. Within a few years, he defeated the Cham invaders and restored Khmer dominance. His coronation followed, marking not just the rise of a new ruler, but the renewal of an empire that had nearly collapsed. Imagine the relief of the people. To have endured defeat, seen temples desecrated, and then to witness victory and revival must have felt like watching the seasons turn from drought to monsoon. Jayavarman was not only their leader, but their redeemer. His image as a compassionate king grew from this foundation, for he was the one who had saved them when all seemed lost. The wars, however, did not end with one victory. Campaigns continued, with Jayavarman leading or commanding armies into Cham territory. Battles were fought along rivers and coasts, soldiers moving in boats as much as on land. Spears, bows, and swords clashed, but behind the scenes were the countless logistical tasks: building ships, gathering rice supplies, repairing roads, and maintaining canals. While warriors marched, farmers at home ensured the armies could eat, laborers maintained the reservoirs that provided stability, and women in villages carried on the rituals that bound society together. Jayavarman's eventual victory over the Khams was decisive. The Khmer Empire expanded once more, reclaiming lost provinces and securing its dominance over much of mainland Southeast Asia. Yet in the quiet, detached perspective we keep tonight, we do not focus on the clamor of battle, but on its consequences. The rebuilding of temples, the rededication of shrines, the sense of renewed safety in villages once haunted by the memory of foreign attack. It is after these wars that Jayavarman turned most fully to his building projects. It is as though, having seen destruction, he wished to create a counterbalance. An empire marked not by ruins, but by enduring stone sanctuaries, not by absence, but by presence. His construction of Bayon, with its enigmatic faces, can be seen as the embodiment of this response. Instead of erecting a fortress bristling with defenses, he raised a temple radiating serenity, a silent declaration that the empire's future would rest on compassion rather than fear. One of the more extraordinary projects attributed to him was the network of rest houses and hospitals. Inscriptions describe them as places where travelers could stop for food, water, and medicine. Imagine a weary pilgrim or trader walking along a long road through the jungle, arriving at a stone structure where attendants provided comfort. Inside, jars of water waited, herbs hung from rafters, mats offered places to rest. For a medieval king to extend such care across his empire was unusual, even astonishing. These projects reveal a vision of kingship that transcended mere military might. Jayavarman styled himself not as a conqueror, but as a bodhisattva king, an earthly reflection of the compassionate beings in Buddhist cosmology who delay their own enlightenment in order to help others. Whether he truly embodied this ideal, or whether it was a carefully crafted image, is difficult to say. But to the people of his time, the temples, the hospitals, and the smiling faces of Bayon stood as tangible proof of his benevolence. And yet, as we gently acknowledge, the grandeur of his reign also rested on immense demands. For every stone tower raised, hundreds of hands lifted chisels, carried blocks, or cooked meals for laborers. The compassion of the king was real in intention, but it came at a cost borne by villagers across the empire. Still, this is the paradox of history. The glory of civilizations is often built on quiet struggles left unrecorded. Jayavarman VII's reign thus represents a turning point. It was an age of rebuilding, of redefining Khmer identity, and of establishing monuments that still capture imagination today. When you walk through Angkor today, the faces of Bayon gaze serenely across centuries, and though the voices of workers and villagers have long since faded, the stones preserve a memory of that vision. As night falls in our telling, imagine standing before one of those smiling faces, the jungle alive with cicadas, the stone cool to the touch, the sky above scattered with stars. The empire is gone, the wars are over, but the image of compassion remains, carved in stone, whispering softly of a time when a king sought to turn suffering into solace. The reign of Jayavarman VII, like all lives and all empires, eventually moved toward decline. But before we reflect on its end, let us linger on what his rule meant to those who lived beneath it. His kingship was not simply a political office, it was a spiritual anchor. In Khmer thought, the king was the axis between heaven and earth, the link between the divine and the mortal world. For villagers planting rice or traders moving goods, the knowledge that such a figure stood at the heart of their realm gave a sense of order, even stability. Inscriptions from his time describe him as a king who felt the suffering of his people as his own. One text compares him to a parent who cannot eat until his children are fed. Whether these words reflect his true feelings or the careful crafting of royal propaganda, they carried power. To a society shaped by both Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies, the idea of a compassionate king was more than comforting. It was revolutionary. It suggested that the throne itself could serve not only as a symbol of dominance, but also as a source of mercy. Imagine again the Bayon Temple, with its many towers rising above the forest canopy. Each tower carried 4 faces, oriented toward the cardinal directions, as if the king's compassion stretched across the world. To walk through that temple in its prime would have been an overwhelming sensory experience. The air filled with incense, the chanting of monks reverberating through the stone halls, the flicker of torchlight glinting off carved bas-reliefs. Those reliefs told stories of battles, daily life, and religious devotion, weaving together the entire fabric of the empire on the walls of a single sanctuary. The bas-reliefs at Bayon remain one of the most extraordinary records of Khmer civilization. Unlike the grand mythological carvings of Angkor, Bayon's panels depict vivid scenes of everyday life. Markets, fishing, cockfights, even people preparing meals. Imagine standing before those carvings, seeing centuries-old images of women weighing fish, men cooking rice, or children playing beside ponds. They remind us that even at the heart of imperial grandeur, the memory of daily existence was preserved. The king's temple celebrated not only gods and kings, but also the lives of his people. Jayavarmanvai's construction projects were so vast and so ambitious that they reshaped the very geography of Angkor. Roads connected distant provinces, berets were repaired and extended, temples multiplied, and monasteries flourished. But there is a quiet irony here. The very scale of these achievements may also have sown seeds of strain. Enormous labor demands, constant resource extraction, and the channeling of energy into monuments meant that the empire was stretched thin. Later generations would struggle under the weight of maintaining what he had built. His final years are more obscure. As with many rulers of antiquity, the details fade. We know that he reigned into old age, his image as a meditative king reflected in statues carved during or just after his life. Perhaps he spent his later years in contemplation, surrounded by monks, the fragrance of incense drifting through his palaces. Or perhaps he continued to oversee projects until his strength waned. Whatever the truth, his death marked the end of an era. After him, the Khmer Empire began a slow transformation. His successors struggled to balance the immense infrastructure he left behind. The shift from Hinduism to Buddhism that he encouraged did not end the older traditions, but created a delicate interplay that shaped Khmer culture for centuries. His reign thus stood as a watershed, an age when the empire reached extraordinary heights of cultural and architectural achievement, yet also began to strain beneath its own grandeur. For the modern traveler who walks among the ruins of Angkor, Jayavarmanvai's presence is still palpable. The serene faces of Bayon seem to follow you, gazing with infinite calm. The sprawling roots of Ta Prohm, twisting around temple walls, evoke both the glory of his dedication and the passage of time that has since reclaimed it. His legacy survives not only in stone, but in the memory of a vision of kingship rooted in compassion, even if imperfect, even if burdened by contradiction. Think of him, then, not only as a king, but as a figure who tried to embody an ideal, a monarch as parent, as healer, as builder, as guardian. His reign reminds us that leadership in the past was not merely about conquest or command, but about shaping meaning, binding people together with symbols and sanctuaries. And while much of the empire's history has faded, this attempt to carve compassion into stone remains visible, whispering across centuries. As we step away from his life, let the image linger. The calm smile of a stone face against the backdrop of the jungle night, the sound of insects rising in chorus, the faint reflection of stars in the waters of Angkor's reservoirs. The wars have ended, the temples endure, and the legacy of Jayavarman VII remains. A king remembered for turning suffering into solace and stone into serenity. The ruins of Angkor, vast and silent beneath the canopy of the Cambodian jungle, continue to stir questions that historians, archaeologists, and dreamers alike have wrestled with for centuries. When you wander among those stones, whether in person or in imagination, you feel both the weight of history and the whispers of mystery. For though the Khmer Empire has left us countless monuments, inscriptions, and works of art, there is still so much that remains unspoken. At the heart of this mystery lies the sheer scale of the city of Angkor. Archaeologists estimate that during its peak, Angkor may have been the largest pre-industrial urban center in the world. Imagine a city stretching across hundreds of square kilometers, interwoven with canals, reservoirs, and causeways. At night, the fires of countless households might have flickered like stars upon the earth. Yet unlike other ancient cities, Angkor was not built of brick or marble. Its houses were constructed primarily from wood and palm, perishable materials that have long since vanished, leaving behind only the temples and waterways carved in enduring stone. This contrast adds to the sense of enigma. We see the spiritual centers, but the living neighborhoods, the hum of voices, and the bustle of markets have been almost entirely erased by time. One of the most enduring puzzles is the system of water management that sustained the Khmer civilization. Enormous reservoirs, called barays, were dug out with astonishing precision. They were not simply lakes. They were carefully engineered structures, lined with embankments and connected by canals. Scholars still debate their primary purpose. Were they meant primarily for irrigation, feeding rice fields during the dry season? Or were they also symbolic, reflecting cosmic oceans of Hindu and Buddhist mythology, with temples like Angkor, Wat, and Bayon positioned as Mount Meru, the sacred axis of the universe, rising from the waters? It is soothing to picture the rhythm of life that this water system made possible. Picture yourself standing at dawn by one of these immense reservoirs. The surface of the water is still, carrying a faint mist. Farmers in the distance begin to guide their buffalo into the fields. The air is thick with the smell of damp soil and early cooking fires. Birds call from the forest canopy. This hydraulic landscape was not merely practical. It was also spiritual, weaving together the physical nourishment of rice and the metaphysical symbolism of the cosmos. Modern technology has deepened the mystery even further. Using LiDAR, laser scanning from aircraft, archaeologists have discovered vast networks of hidden roads, canals, and structures beneath the forest floor. What looked like empty jungle is in fact a palimpsest of human habitation. Entire neighborhoods, temples, and engineered landscapes lie invisible beneath the trees. The discovery suggests that Angkor was not only immense in scale, but also meticulously planned. And yet, for all this grandeur, the reasons for its eventual decline remain contested. Some theories point to overextension. The very success of Jayavarman VII's building projects may have overtaxed resources. Others look to climate. Centuries of monsoon fluctuations, years of floods followed by years of drought, may have destabilized the delicate water systems. Still others emphasize shifts in trade routes, as maritime commerce drew wealth away from inland centers. Perhaps it was not a single cause, but a combination of factors that slowly and almost imperceptibly unravel the empire's fabric. The mystery of Angkor is not only about decline, but also about meaning. When you gaze at Angkor Wat at sunrise, its silhouette mirrored perfectly in the still waters of its moat, you are struck not just by its size, but by its precision. Every tower, every wall, every corridor aligns with celestial bodies. The temple is, in a way, a kind of cosmic clock, tracking equinoxes and solstices. For the Khmer, this alignment of architecture with the heavens reaffirmed the harmony of the human world with divine order. Yet how exactly these astronomical calculations were determined remains uncertain. Another enigma lies in the artistry of the temples themselves. The bas-reliefs are extraordinarily detailed, sometimes stretching hundreds of meters, depicting not only mythological battles, but also minute details of ordinary life. Scholars debate how much of this was strictly symbolic and how much was observational. Did the artists draw from what they saw around them, or did they work within strictly prescribed patterns? The fact that we can still wonder about this, that these questions remain unanswered, gives the temples their aura of mystery. Archaeologists, historians, and visitors today all participate in this act of wonder. To walk through the ruins is to become part of a conversation across centuries. Each discovery adds to the story, but also deepens the sense of what is unknown. And perhaps this is part of Angkor's enduring power. It invites us to linger not only on what we know, but on what remains hidden. Close your eyes and picture the jungle at night. The ruins silent, roots twisting across doorways, the stars overhead. The air is heavy, fragrant with damp leaves and night blossoms. Somewhere in the darkness, a temple tower rises, carved faces watching with eternal calm. This is the mystery of Angkor. It resists final answers, offering instead a meditation on time, memory, and the fragility of human ambition. When archaeologists study Angkor, they're not merely uncovering stones. They are, in a sense, listening to echoes. Every unearthed brick, every inscription, every piece of pottery is a whisper from a world that once thrived with voices, movement, and ritual. Yet despite centuries of study, Angkor continues to resist complete understanding. Its mysteries shimmering just out of reach, like the reflection of towers on a still reservoir. One of the most perplexing aspects of Khmer civilization is the manner in which sacred and secular life blended together. Temples such as Angkor, Wat, or Bayon were not simply sites of worship. They were also centers of administration, places where rituals intersected with royal decrees, and where cosmic order and earthly governance were considered inseparable. The question arises, did the common people truly understand the astronomical alignments, the metaphysical symbolism, and the intricacies of the sacred topography? Or was it largely the domain of priests, kings, and scholars, while villagers simply marveled at the scale of the works? Picture, for a moment, a craftsman carving a bas-relief on the walls of Angkor Wat. His chisel taps rhythmically, each sound sharp against the stone, but fading quickly into the humid air. He may not have understood the full cosmological meaning of his work, but he knew his task, to render each figure with precision, to ensure the narrative flowed smoothly along the temple walls. He likely paused to wipe sweat from his brow, glanced at the forest beyond, and then returned to his steady labor. Through thousands of such hands, the cosmic vision of kings took material form. But even here lies mystery. How were such vast construction projects organized? We know little of the exact mechanisms of labor, the logistics of feeding and housing thousands of workers, or the detailed methods of quarrying and transporting immense blocks of sandstone. Some inscriptions speak of corvée labor, commoners drafted into service for a period of time. Others hint at specialized guilds of artisans who pass skills down generations. Yet the sheer coordination required remains awe-inspiring and curiously opaque. Equally enigmatic are the countless inscriptions found throughout the Khmer world. Some are grand and formal, celebrating kings, deities, and victories. Others are humbler, dedicating donations of rice fields or livestock to temples. These texts provide glimpses into lives otherwise invisible in the stone record. One inscription might note the donation of a cow for ritual purposes, another the construction of a small shrine by villagers. But many inscriptions have been eroded, their meanings lost in gaps and fragments, as if time itself has edited the story, leaving us to guess at the missing lines. Another layer of mystery lies in the symbolic geography of Angkor. Temples were not scattered randomly. They were carefully placed, aligned with one another, connected by roads and canals. Scholars debate whether these alignments mirror constellations, trace out sacred mandalas, or correspond to astronomical cycles. Some even suggest that Angkor Wat, with its galleries and reliefs, may have functioned as a kind of calendrical device, allowing priests to track celestial time. Imagine priests walking the corridors, noting the play of shadows during equinoxes and solstices, listening to the rhythm of the heavens in stone. But if such knowledge once existed, It has not come down to us intact. We know only fragments, enough to tantalize but not enough to complete the picture. This is part of the beauty and frustration of Angkor. Its grandeur is preserved, but the full instructions for interpreting it are lost. We are left with symbols without their key, stories without their endings. The jungle itself adds to the enigma. When the empire waned, the forest slowly reclaimed the city. Trees pushed roots into cracks. Vines wove across doorways. Animals nested in abandoned corridors. For centuries, travelers told tales of forgotten cities hidden in the forest, their accounts blending truth with wonder. When European explorers in the 19th century encountered Angkor, they described it as a lost world, though of course the Khmer people had never truly forgotten its existence. Still, the image of a vast, abandoned city sleeping beneath the canopy captured imaginations across the globe. Even today, the jungle holds secrets. Every archaeological season reveals something new. A hidden shrine, a collapsed reservoir, a set of inscriptions. The work is slow, painstaking, and at times uncertain. Tools brush delicately against stone. Maps are redrawn. Theories are proposed and revised. Each discovery is like lifting a small corner of a great tapestry, only to realize that the design stretches far beyond what can be seen. In considering these mysteries, one cannot help but reflect on impermanence. The Khmer Empire was mighty, ambitious, and extraordinarily creative. And yet, like so many civilizations, it eventually passed into decline. The reasons remain debated, but the outcome is clear. The jungle grew, the stones weathered, and life moved on. What remains is not only grandeur, but silence. A silence that invites contemplation. Close your eyes and imagine standing before the gates of Angkor Thom. The faces of stone gazing serenely down at you. The road stretches ahead, lined with statues of gods and demons pulling at the body of a serpent in eternal tug-of-war. Beyond lies the city, now quiet, but once filled with voices, carts, elephants, and chants. You walk forward, and though the path is broken, though the walls are worn, the presence of mystery endures. Angkor is not merely a relic. It is a question without a final answer. And perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate. It is not just what we know about the Khmer Empire, but what we do not know, what we cannot know, that keeps Angkor alive in our imaginations. The ruins are like dreams carved in stone, glimpses of another time that we can approach but never fully inhabit. The mysteries of Angkor do not only reside in its architecture or inscriptions. They are also carried in the art, in the rituals, and in the way the Khmer conceived of the cosmos. The reliefs that cover the temples depict not just battles and kings, but mythological scenes, celestial beings, and cycles of creation and destruction. Each figure is carved with a stillness that invites contemplation. Imagine a slow walk along the galleries of Angkor Wat, tracing the long bas-reliefs with your eyes. One wall presents the churning of the ocean of milk, where gods and demons pull at a serpent wound around a mountain, while celestial beings watch from above. The scene is vast, intricate, and yet repetitive, a rhythm carved into stone. You can almost hear the imagined creak of the rope, the chanting of priests, the splash of divine waters. It is art as story, art as prayer, art as a model of the universe itself. Yet even here, there are unanswered questions. Were these stories told aloud to pilgrims who passed along the walls? Did priests explain each detail, or did the carvings themselves suffice as silent instruction? The stillness of the stone does not reveal its use, only its presence. And so we speculate, piecing together ritual from fragments. The daily rituals of Angkor remain partly obscured. Inscriptions mention offerings of rice, oil, flowers, and livestock. We know that Brahmin priests oversaw complex ceremonies, and later, Buddhist monks adapted these spaces for their own forms of devotion. But what did it feel like to stand in the courtyard as smoke rose from burning incense, as chants echoed beneath vaulted stone ceilings, as the sun filtered through narrow doorways? Archaeology gives us bones of information, but the flesh, the sounds, the emotions, the pace of life remains elusive. The art itself raises questions of purpose. Did the common villager visiting Angkor would understand the long mythological reliefs? Or were they meant primarily for the elite who possessed the education to recognize the symbolism? Perhaps it was enough simply to witness the scale, the harmony, the quiet repetition of figures. In that sense, the art may have functioned much like a lullaby, patterns that soothe even if their words are not fully grasped. Equally puzzling is the role of dance and music in Khmer ritual life. Carvings depict apsaras, celestial dancers with delicate gestures, hair arranged in elaborate crowns, garments flowing in carved stone folds. They appear in long lines, frozen mid-motion, a silent orchestra of bodies. But the music that once guided their movements has long since disappeared into silence. We can only imagine the plucked strings, the steady drums, the rising voices that once filled the temple courtyards at night. It was sound designed not for spectacle alone, but to create a connection between heaven and earth, between the human and the divine. One of the enduring enigmas of Angkor is the purpose of its water system beyond the practical. The reservoirs, or barays, were vast enough to irrigate fields, but their design suggests symbolic intent as well. Scholars debate whether they were meant to represent the cosmic ocean surrounding Mount Meru. Perhaps they were both practical and spiritual, water for crops and water for the gods. Standing by the edge of a baray, with its still surface reflecting the sky, one could feel both the presence of engineering genius and the quiet suggestion of eternity. Then there are the statues, Buddhas, Hindu deities, guardians, and mythical creatures that once filled the temples. Many were removed, damaged, or lost through the centuries. Some survive in museums. Others lie half-buried near ruins. Their expressions are serene, timeless, gazing not at us but through us. They embody the paradox of Angkor, power and peace, grandeur and fragility. What prayers were whispered before these figures? What offerings were left at their feet? These are questions that linger unanswered, hovering in the still air of the ruins. The more scholars study Angkor, the more they encounter this duality. The empire was both deeply knowable and perpetually obscure. We can measure the stones, chart the canals, date the inscriptions. Yet the lived experience, the thoughts of a farmer offering rice, the feelings of a dancer before a performance, the silence of a monk in meditation, these are lost to time. And perhaps that is why Angkor feels like a dream. It is not only what it was, but what it suggests, what it leaves open that holds us. Close your eyes and imagine the end of a long day at Angkor. The sun sets behind the western towers. Shadows stretch across the causeways. A priest lights lamps inside the sanctuaries. The smell of oil and smoke lingers in the air. Pilgrims prepare for rest, murmuring prayers as they lie beneath woven mats. Somewhere, a drum beats slowly, fading into silence. This is not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of ritual complete, of cycles fulfilled. And then, centuries later, silence of another kind. The empire wanes. The priests are gone. The chants cease. The jungle advances step by step, root by root. The apsaras on the walls no longer dance to music, but to shadows of leaves moving in the wind. The great berets still reflect the sky, but fewer eyes gaze into them. Mystery deepens, for even as the stones remain, their voices grow fainter. In contemplating Angkor's mysteries, we are reminded of how little we can ever know with certainty. And perhaps, as with many things in history, that is as it should be. Mystery itself is part of the legacy, part of the reason these ruins continue to speak to us across time. They are not only relics, but questions carved into stone, left intentionally or unintentionally for those who come later. The Khmer Empire gave the world not only temples and canals, but also wonder. It left puzzles without solutions, stories without endings, rhythms without their full melodies. And as you listen, as you imagine yourself drifting among the ruins, you may feel how fitting this is. For history, like sleep, is not always about clarity. It is about drifting into a space where answers blur, where the known meets the unknown, where silence carries its own meaning. When we speak of the Khmer Empire, it is tempting to focus only on the kings, the temples, and the grand works of architecture. Yet empires are sustained not only by rulers, but also by the vast web of human lives that existed beneath them. For every priest conducting a ceremony in Angkor Wat, there were hundreds of villagers and surrounding settlements, whose daily rhythms formed the true heartbeat of the empire. To understand the Khmer world, one must imagine both the elite and the common, and the subtle contrast between them. Picture, for a moment, a rural village in the shadow of Angkor's towers. Huts raised on stilts, thatched with palm leaves, lined the edge of rice fields. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Farmers bent low among the paddies, guiding water buffalo through mud. The rhythm of planting and harvesting dictated life, tied closely to the cycle of the monsoon. Children played nearby, their laughter mingling with the calls of birds, while women tended cooking fires, preparing simple meals of rice flavored with fish or herbs. These villagers lived lives of constant labor, yet their efforts sustained the great monuments. Each temple stone, each offering of rice to the gods, ultimately rested upon the shoulders of those who toiled in the fields. The grandeur of Angkor could not exist without this quiet, unseen foundation. Their lives were not written in inscriptions, but they formed the base upon which history itself was carved. Now, contrast this with the life of the elite. Within the walls of Angkor Thom, or in palatial residences near the temples, nobles lived with relative abundance. Their homes, though still made largely of wood, were larger, with carved decorations, raised floors, and shaded verandas. They dined on finer meals, rice accompanied by fruits, meats, and delicacies gathered through networks of trade. Their garments were woven with more care, dyed in rich colors, adorned with jewelry of gold or bronze. For them, life offered a degree of comfort and distinction, even if it was still bound to the greater cycles of nature. Religious officials, too, occupied a world apart. Priests held authority not just over ritual, but also over knowledge, astronomy, language, law, and architecture. Monks, particularly after the rise of Buddhism, became visible figures, moving quietly among temples, chanting prayers, and guiding communities. Their lives were marked by discipline and renunciation, but also by influence, for they shaped the moral and spiritual atmosphere of the Khmer people. And above them, all stood the king. The monarch of the Khmer Empire was not merely a political leader, but also a semi-divine figure, a link between heaven and earth. His palace was at the symbolic center of Angkor, near the great temples, a reminder of his role as the axis of both worldly and spiritual realms. Inscriptions praised his conquests, his offerings to the gods, his patronage of temples. To the common villager, he was distant, almost mythical, a figure encountered not in person, but through stone carvings, rituals, and stories. The contrast between the humble villager and the exalted king could not have been greater. Yet in many ways, their lives were bound together. The king's power rested on the rice grown in the fields, the temple's grandeur on the sweat of farmers and craftsmen. In turn, the villagers looked to the king for order, for protection, and for the blessings of the gods he represented. Theirs was a relationship of dependence, of distance, and of unspoken connection. Archaeological evidence sheds light on this divide. Remains of simple pottery, cooking tools, and modest wooden structures tell us of the villagers' lives. Meanwhile, the surviving stone inscriptions and grand monuments speak of the elite. History has preserved the voices of kings and priests far more clearly than those of farmers. And yet, both worlds coexisted in constant interplay. The rhythm of festivals brought these groups together, at least temporarily. During major religious celebrations, villagers might travel to the temples, carrying offerings of rice, flowers, or incense. They joined nobles and priests in ceremonies that honored gods and ancestors. For a moment, the distinctions of rank blurred, as all participated in the shared cycle of devotion. Still, even here, the differences remained visible in the clothing, in the seating arrangements, in the roles assigned within rituals. Imagine yourself standing on the causeway to Angkor, what during such a festival. The air thick with incense, musicians beating slow rhythms on drums, farmers arriving with woven baskets, nobles arriving on elephants or carried litters, shaded by parasols, monks chanting in unison, their voices blending into a low hum. The temple glows with lamplight, its towers looming against the night sky. It is a scene both communal and divided, uniting the empire in devotion, yet reminding all of the distance between the humblest villager and the most powerful king. This contrast is one of the enduring truths of history. Greatness often rests upon invisible labor. The Khmer Empire's beauty and mystery may be preserved in stone, but its true foundation was woven from countless ordinary lives. To rest among the ruins today is to remember not only the kings who built them, but also the farmers whose quiet toil made them possible. If we step deeper into the contrasts of Khmer society, we begin to notice not only the visible differences between commoner and elite, but also the subtler layers that shaped everyday experiences. The Khmer world was structured like the temples themselves, a great center surrounded by expanding rings of support. At the very heart was the king, radiating divine authority. Around him clustered nobles, priests, scholars, and officials. Beyond them stretched the townsfolk, artisans, traders, and craftsmen. And farthest from the center were the farmers, fishermen, and forest dwellers, whose lives were woven into the rhythms of land and water. The king's wealth and prestige were reflected not only in his palace, but in the vast networks of tribute that flowed toward him. Regional governors, appointed by royal authority, collected goods from villages: rice, fish, honey, wax, textiles, and presented them at Angkor. From this abundance, the court redistributed resources to temples, military campaigns, and construction projects. To a farmer, the offering of rice might seem small, but multiplied across thousands of villages, it became the surplus that sustained an empire. Nobles occupied an intermediate world. They lived in larger houses, with carved lintels and ornamented posts, often near waterways that brought both trade and prestige. They oversaw lands, commanded retainers, and enjoyed privileges in dress and ceremony. Inscriptions describe them wearing jewelry of gold, silver, and gemstones, though such luxuries were still modest compared to royal treasures. Their role was to bridge the will of the king with the needs of local populations, ensuring labor and tribute flowed smoothly. Priests and monks formed another layer of influence. They held power not through armies or wealth, but through knowledge and spiritual authority. A priest trained in Sanskrit might recite hymns to the Hindu gods, while a monk versed in Pali texts guided Buddhist devotion. Their influence shaped not only religious life, but also law, education, and even engineering, since astronomical knowledge determined the timing of rituals and agricultural cycles. In this sense, priests and monks were custodians of order, linking cosmic harmony to earthly prosperity. For artisans and craftsmen, life was different still. They lived in towns near the great temple complexes, often in clusters of workshops. Their hands carved stone into graceful apsaras. Their chisels inscribed lines of sacred script. Their looms wove the garments worn by nobility. Their skills were highly valued, and yet their lives were precarious, for they depended on constant commissions from a court. A change in royal patronage, or the exhaustion of resources, could reduce their livelihoods to hardship. Still, their work endures today, etched into the walls of Angkor, a silent legacy of countless unnamed artisans. Then there were the traders. While the Khmer heartland thrived on rice, trade brought exotic goods, ceramics from China, cloth from India, spices from the Malay world, and rare woods from the forests. Markets buzzed with quiet energy. Imagine narrow stalls beneath woven roofs, baskets piled with rice, bundles of herbs, jars of fish paste, and polished bronze tools. The hum of conversation mingled with the scent of dried fish and fresh fruit. Here, people of different classes intermingled more freely, exchanging goods and news. The market was a place where a farmer might sell surplus rice, where a craftsman might buy fish, where ideas flowed alongside goods. Yet at the edges of this society, we must also consider those who stood apart, the laborers and captives. Some were pressed into service for large projects, digging reservoirs, hauling stone blocks, or maintaining roads. Others were prisoners of war, absorbed into the empire as servants or workers. Their lives were marked by toil and uncertainty, their identities often erased by history. And yet, their presence was essential. The hydraulic systems of Angkor, the very lifeblood of the city, would not have functioned without their labor. The contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary was further expressed in ritual. For a noble, participation in temple ceremonies was a display of status, wearing fine cloth, offering gold or gemstones, standing close to priests. For a villager, the same ceremony was marked by simpler offerings, perhaps a bowl of rice, a garland of flowers, or a clay lamp. But both acts, though unequal in scale, carried equal symbolic weight. To the gods, devotion mattered more than wealth, and so each person, regardless of status, found meaning in these shared rituals. Gender also shaped contrasts in daily life. Women in Khmer society played active roles in markets, in agriculture, and even in managing estates. Inscriptions name queens, noblewomen, and priestesses who exercised influence. For ordinary women, responsibilities included tending fields, raising children, and weaving textiles. Their work was vital, even if less often celebrated in inscriptions. One can imagine the quiet rhythm of a loom, the soft beat of cloth stretched taut, the warm flicker of a cooking fire, all small, intimate details that reveal another side of the empire's life. As twilight fell across Angkor, the contrasts of class and status softened in a shared experience. Farmers lit lamps outside their huts. Nobles retired to verandas cooled by evening breezes. Monks chanted in the temples, their voices drifting across water reservoirs. The great city exhaled, and for a brief moment, all its people, king, noble, priest, artisan, and farmer, shared the same night sky, dotted with stars. The empire was vast, its differences stark, but its nights were shared equally, uniting all beneath the quiet rhythm of time. The Khmer Empire's social contrasts remind us that history is rarely uniform. It is layered, uneven, and complex. But within that complexity lies a certain beauty. The way countless individual lives, some grand, others humble, combine to create a civilization of enduring wonder. To listen to their echoes is to hear not only the story of kings, but also the whispers of farmers, traders, women, and workers whose labor still lingers in the stones. As we move toward the final view of Khmer society, it helps to step back and imagine the empire as a grand mosaic. Each tile, whether polished with gold or worn by mud, contributed to the larger design. The king's radiance may have been the centerpiece, but without the countless supporting figures, the scribes, soldiers, merchants, and mothers, the empire could never have sustained its scale. To fully sense these contrasts, let us walk once more through the daily rhythms of both grandeur and modesty. In the royal precincts, life was structured by ceremony. A nobleman awoke to the sound of attendants preparing his robes, silks dyed deep red or indigo, adorned with subtle threads of gold. Servants brought water perfumed with flowers for bathing, and meals of rice, fish, and tropical fruits were laid out on trays of bronze. His mornings might involve meetings with officials, hearing disputes, or overseeing estates. Afternoons often turned to religious duties, supervising temple offerings or attending rituals. The evenings, cooled by breezes, were times for poetry, music, or simply sitting in shaded courtyards, watching dancers perform. Contrast this with the rhythm of a farmer. His day began before dawn, stepping into fields damp with dew. With wooden plows pulled by oxen, he guided furrows into the soil, hands and feet caked in mud. His meals were simple: rice, dried fish, perhaps a handful of vegetables. There were no courtyards or music, but instead the steady chorus of frogs, cicadas, and the rustle of water moving through irrigation channels. At night, his home was lit by a clay lamp, its flame faint and flickering. While the nobleman pondered politics, the farmer thought only of whether the harvest would be enough. Somewhere in between lived the artisans. Their days were long, their hands calloused, their eyes narrowed against dust. Yet their work was filled with pride. To carve a figure into stone, to weave silk that shimmered in temple light. These were achievements that connected them to eternity. An artisan's life might not have been marked by wealth, but by the quiet satisfaction of leaving behind beauty that outlived him. Indeed, while kings are remembered by name, artisans are remembered by their work, which still whispers through the sandstone walls of Angkor. The lives of women across these social layers carried both responsibility and resilience. A queen might manage palace affairs, correspond with religious leaders, and even act as regent in her husband's absence. Noble women oversaw estates, arranged marriages, and ensured alliances between families. Common women balanced farming tasks with child-rearing, weaving, and market trade. In marketplaces, women often dominated the stalls, selling rice, herbs, fish, and textiles. The image of women in Khmer society is not one of silence, but of presence, vital, constant, and enduring. Children, too, reveal contrasts. The child of a noble might be taught Sanskrit verses, drilled in the etiquette of courtly behavior, and instructed in temple lore. He or she grew up surrounded by musicians, tutors, and guards. A child of a farmer, by contrast, learned to plant rice, to catch fish in nets, to weave mats, and to mend tools. Childhood was brief, for work began early. Yet both noble and farmer's child looked up at the same temple towers, and both played under the same monsoon rains, laughter mingling across the fields and courtyard alike. The empire also relied on a less visible population, the servants and retainers who wove the invisible threads of daily order. They carried messages, fetched water, swept courtyards, and tended fires. For them, life was neither grand nor independent. It was one of constant service. Their work was unrecorded, yet without them, the elite would have faltered. They are the shadows of history, but shadows without which light cannot be perceived. Religious devotion further highlighted social contrasts. A noble family might endow a temple with land, laborers, and treasures, inscribing their names into stone. This act ensured not only spiritual merit, but also prestige. A farmer's family, unable to afford grand gifts, might simply offer a bowl of rice, a flower, or a prayer. Yet in the eyes of the divine, both offerings held weight. The grand inscriptions and the humble garlands alike testified to the devotion that bound society together. Festivals drew these layers into proximity. During great temple celebrations, nobles arrived in processions, shaded by parasols and followed by attendants. Farmers and traders mingled in crowds, watching dancers and listening to the drone of sacred chants. Children chased one another, while elders lit lamps. The festival ground blurred distinctions. Everyone gazed together at the same rituals, listened to the same prayers, and shared in the same sense of cosmic order. For a moment, the empire was united in a harmony of devotion, even as social hierarchies remained intact. But history reminds us that such harmony was fragile. Droughts could strain farmers beyond endurance, causing unrest. Nobles sometimes challenged royal authority, creating instability. The immense weight of labor required for reservoirs and temples eventually strained the empire's resources. The contrast that had once balanced society between king and farmer, noble and artisan, began to stretch and fracture. And in time, the brilliance of Angkor faded, its palaces abandoned, its temples overtaken by roots and silence. Yet the story is not one of loss alone. For the contrast of Khmer life, though unequal, created a culture of extraordinary richness. From the farmer's rice to the noble's jewels, from the artisan's chisels to the monk's chants, each thread wove into a tapestry still visible today. When you walk through Angkor's ruins, you do not just see the power of kings. You see the footsteps of farmers, the handiwork of artisans, the devotion of women, the laughter of children. You see a world once alive, vivid in its contrasts, and enduring in its legacy. As the night deepens in our telling, imagine yourself sitting quietly at the edge of Angkor Wat, the great temple silhouetted against a star-filled sky. Around you, in memory, the layers of Khmer life unfold. The king in his golden palace, the noble in his courtyard, the farmer in his field, the artisan in his workshop, the trader in his market, the monk in his shrine. Each life distinct, each life necessary, each life part of the whole. And as you breathe in the calm, you can sense how, across centuries, their world still whispers, inviting you to rest in its rhythm. And so, we arrive gently at the end of our wandering through history. From ancient myths to medieval fears, from scientific curiosity to modern understanding. The story of sleepwalking has carried us across centuries of human thought. Each era layered its own meaning onto the mystery. Yet through all of it, one truth remained constant: the quiet rhythm of night and the watchful presence of those who cared for others in their most vulnerable moments. It is humbling to reflect on how much and how little has changed. The explanations have shifted, once the work of gods, then humors and spirits, and now the intricate patterns of the sleeping brain. Yet the sight of someone rising from bed, eyes distant, steps uncertain, remains the same as it ever was. Across every age, such moments have inspired a mix of wonder, patience, and a gentle urge to protect. You might notice that this story, while filled with mystery, also carries a soothing lesson. It reminds us that sleep itself has always been a place of vulnerability, but also of care. To watch over another in the stillness of night is to join a chain stretching back through time. Countless unseen guardians, each offering safety in silence. Whether in a candlelit chamber or beneath the quiet glow of modern lamps, this gesture is unchanged. It is a simple reassurance, timeless in its tenderness. You are not alone. And perhaps this is what makes boring history for sleep so comforting. These stories, though seemingly distant and detached, draw us closer to the shared experience of being human. The strangeness of ancient beliefs, the fading superstitions, the patient work of scholars, all of it settles now into a gentle background hum. What lingers is not the detail of explanations, but the quiet atmosphere they create, the reminder that people across ages, like us, looked for peace in the middle of the night. As you rest now, allow this story to dissolve into stillness. Imagine the long centuries fading like the last light of dusk, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Feel the weight of the day ease away, like footsteps receding down a quiet corridor. In their place, let calmness settle over you, as soft as a blanket drawn gently to the chin. The myths have quieted, the history has been told, and the watchers of the past have passed their gentle task to you: to rest, to dream, to drift slowly into sleep. So as we close tonight's journey, I'll simply say, may your night be peaceful, may your dreams be kind, and may the calm of history carry you softly into rest.